Did you know that your ancestors' traits are embedded in your DNA? Well, of course, you knew that. And your lineage has a direct impact on the way you look, the way you think, and the way you behave. And what about those crazies in the ancestral tree? Are they also a part of the DNA? Do I get that? Well, come and find out. We're going to unlock the secrets hidden in your genes and discover how your ancestors' DNA is influencing your life today. So get excited. We're going to explore a little bit about your heritage, and then we're going to learn about what makes you very unique and what new science is telling us about your genes and what control you have over it. Hello, hello, hello. You are listening to the No Brainers Empowering Possibilities Show. These are dialogues of encouragement with fresh perspectives, invitations to ahas, a little bit of science, and a dash of behavioral psychology, and skills and tools that you can use right now. So if leveling up is on your radar, my friend, you are at the right show. I'm your host, Roseanne Marsh, author of the teen and the parent empowerment curriculum called Level Up. And you're listening to episode number 68, Ancestral DNA. Is it your blueprint for life? Your ancestors' traits are woven in the fabric of who you are. Yep, that includes the good, the bad, and the crazies that don our genealogical trees. But from your looks to your thoughts and your behavior, their legacy really can live on through us. So in what way does it live on in us? And are we stuck to a blueprint of gene structure that was created by ancestors that fell in love and created our genealogical tree? Is the saying true that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree? I know you've heard that before. Well, the only way to find out is to learn about those that came before us. Now, many of you might say, oh, well, I have no information, or I've got a ton of information. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit about helping you find information. But our ancestors laid the foundation for us, and that's helping us thrive today. Their lives they lived are far removed from what we're living right now, right? But yet they laid a foundation for progress, for change, and really where we are today. Some of them lived in conditions that would make us weak in the knees, and we would never trade them places. Yet without surviving, we wouldn't be here, right? So what makes up their DNA, and what did they pass on to us? So today we're going to talk about your ancestral DNA with all they experienced. Did that do something to their DNA? And is that who we really are? Well, my first question would be, what do you know about your relatives from the past? What did they possibly do? Did they cross the frontier like mine did? Did they come overseas? Did they escape times of terror, control from regimes? Did they establish new towns? Did they face challenging conditions? You know, our predecessors really displayed exceptional resilience and strength and courage. They had to be able to survive, right? They didn't back down in the face of loss and despair because there weren't a lot of options like there are today, the helps and the handouts that there are today. But they continued to persevere. And for that, we could be so grateful. And we honor the legacy of our ancestors and we draw strength from their example. But what are some of the things that maybe we want to learn about them? Well, for the sake of the conversation that we're having today about our DNA, we want to know, what was the time period that they lived in? What were their living circumstances? When we can find out a little bit about that, it gives us perspective as to why they maybe acted the way they did or the occupations that they chose. So what challenges did they overcome? What historical markers took place during that time that would have affected their lives and therefore would have been a way that they continued living? My parents, for example, lived during the Depression, and there certainly were things that they continued to do because of that life experience. What health concerns did they have? And were those health concerns environmental, or were they because there was a lack of medical care? And if there's a way to find out, how did they overcome life challenges? And what were those challenges? And how did they enjoy life? What was their faith tradition? What were their beliefs? And you know what? When we find out what their beliefs are, that explains a lot about how they approached life. When we get to know our ancestors, we get to know their stories. And their stories really tell us how they coped or didn't cope. Gives us the lay of the land of what was happening in history and what pivots they had to make in their lives. And as we know, sometimes history repeats itself, and there may be some things that they went through or how they approach things that they could teach us that we could apply in a very different time, but maybe in a very applicable way. So learning about our ancestors really gives us a lot of information on their traits or their values, their virtues, their ability to thrive. And that's one of the things, even without even looking at our DNA strand, we can learn from their examples just from that. But today we want to go into that helix, that DNA strand, and we want to talk a little bit about what we inherited from our predecessors, which brings me to one of the hugest debates, and that is, are we a product of our environment, of nurture, or are we a product of our DNA and our genes, of nature? Is it innate in us, or is it something that we learned? And honestly, that debate continues. But let's talk a little bit about both, and then you can make your decision. There was a study done on male rats, and they were exposed to the scent of cherry blossoms, something that smells really good, right? Except every time they smelled that cherry blossom, they would shock the rats. So needless to say, every time they'd smell that, they'd go into trauma and shake. Well, they started to not shock them and just introduce the cherry blossom fragrance. Even though they weren't being shocked like Pavlov's dog, they would start to shake because there was the fear and the association of those two. Now, what's interesting, they allowed those rats to breed, and their children, even though separated from them and not taught from their parents, when they were later exposed to the cherry blossom fragrance without being shocked, right? That wasn't even associated with it. Those rats would tremble. So you can't really say that it was environmentally taught, but somehow it was passed on to the next generation. In fact, they found when the children bred, even the second generation would tremble when they smelled that smell. They're doing some studies now where they have found that the emotions of a mother are passed on to the fetus. And of course, we know that emotions are a mixture of chemicals and hormones in the body. So it's just not like we have a thought or a feeling in our heart. There's actually chemistry that alters in our body anytime we have a high emotion. So whatever a pregnant woman is feeling all the time, that is actually chemicals that are flushing through the fetus. And then when they're born, they are born with that propensity, very similar to the story of the rats. So what they're finding is a lot of anxiety and depression in children and teens, etc., because of what they were exposed to in the utero. And because this is a maternal line, anything that the mother passes on to the child, female then passes on to the next generation. So you can see that there's something gene expression wise that is altering, that is allowing that to be passed on, even if that wasn't in the original DNA strand. But it could have been in the DNA strand. And because of certain things that happen, the gene is expressed. So what does that mean? Let's back up a second, because I want to tell you one more personal story. And this is actually of my great grandmother. Her name is Betsy Wyatt, and she was the mother of 12 children. 4 of them ended up passing away at different ages. But when she was pregnant, her husband was out of town. And at night, she heard some men breaking in. She thought it might be Indians. So I'm going to read from my grandmother's diary, who was recounting the story that her mother had told her. She said she was alone overnight, heavily pregnant, and that night she saw men, maybe Indians, come to the house. She was scared, so she yelled out, "John, quick, get the gun," just to scare them off. The men finally left, and she sat at the end of the upstairs hallway with her knees pulled up as far as she could, and she balled up her hands and her cheeks, trembling for the rest of the night. Her baby was later born with a birthmark on his cheek. You could probably say, oh, that's just coincidental. Maybe, maybe not. The chemistry of the body can do amazing things to change our physiology, our neurology, our psychology. But enter now what I think is one of the most exciting sciences, and that's epigenetics. Epi means above, so it's talking about leveling up, in a way, our genetics. So the DNA is the instruction to the body of how to build a body. This is the instructions, and then it's copied within single strands. So remember, the helix has 2 strands. The RNA is 2 single strands, and then it goes out to like a protein factory, and it decides what tissue or body part it's going to become. So a section of that DNA then is your genes. So we all have the DNA, which is the instructions, but epigenetics tells which genes would be expressed or turned on, or which ones would be turned off or silenced. So turned on means that it would turn into a certain protein and it would become something. For example, some people have a propensity for cancer, and they have a gene that has the potential to turn into that. If it becomes expressed or turned on, then it goes out and makes that cancerous tissue. If it's silenced, then it doesn't. So as an example of a DNA in our genes would be, I heard Dr. Berg talk about the DNA is like sheet music, and it's instructions on how to make this music. But nothing happens until somebody plays something. So it's just like our genes, nothing happens until the gene is expressed. Now, these aren't all bad genes, these are good genes too, right? But when something is done and that gene is expressed, then it joins with a protein and becomes a certain cell or body part, etc. And because of our DNA, we could be predisposed to certain things. And you've heard, well, it runs in our families, so I'm doomed. It's just who we are. And that's true to a certain extent. But we now know there are ways for us to turn on and ways for us to turn off the gene expression. When the right scenario happens, a gene can be expressed. But listen to this example. Here's another study of rats. Sorry, I know I get sad when I hear animals are being tested, but they're helping us humans in an amazing way. They raised some rats together that genetically came from the same parents. They were under the same conditions, the same foods, allowed to rest the same. So basically raised environmentally, the closest that they could get. Then they observed the rats with their babies. They impregnated them, and then they observed the mothers with their babies. Now, a good mother rat is good if she's licking her babies, and the babies love to be licked. So there would be the mothers that were licking their babies, and then there were the mothers that maybe periodically, but really weren't nurturing at all. So from that, they could tell nurturing gene was expressed, the non-nurturing gene was turned on these that didn't lick, and the innate nurture of a good rat was solid in these other mothers. So then when their babies had babies, the ones that had rarely been licked didn't lick either. And the ones who had been licked by their mothers nurtured the same way and licked. And now came the rest of the story. They took the babies and they switched them out. Okay, that reminds me of a game show that they had where parents would exchange children with another family for 2 weeks. Like, that was crazy. But they took the babies and they changed them. So those who'd never gotten licked before were given to the nurturing mothers, and the babies of the nurturing mothers were given to those who did not lick very much. And of course, those weren't thriving very well because they were used to being nurtured. The ones who hadn't had it before were absolutely excited to be licked. And then when they propagated, those who had been initially not licked and then licked, and they learned to lick. And those who had not licked did not lick. So you might say, okay, this is total environment, except for the fact that when they looked at their DNA, those who had been not licked had a methyl on their gene, which turned it on, right? Meaning they weren't a nurturing mother. But when they had been under a nurturing mother, the methyl was removed. Okay, that right there is standing ovation kind of stuff, right? Because that tells you that through positive things that can happen through environmentally, through nurturing, we can absolutely change the gene expression in our DNA blueprint. Oh my gosh. I have a round of applause for what the rats taught us. Very cool, right? Now, here's another example. Set of twins, identical twins, males, separated at birth. Both were raised in completely different areas of the world, completely different environments. They were reunited 38 years later. Now, this is remarkable. They were the same height, the same weight. They had gone into the same profession. Now it gets crazier than this. Are you ready? They had both been married twice, and both of their wives had the same name. They even drove the same car. Okay, so you know there's something DNA pattern-wise going on, right? But there were a few different things, but you knew the pattern of that blueprint was in place. Now let's stop and address those ancestors that are in our tree, the nefarious natures, the black sheep, those colorful reputations. Yikes. Am I going to end up like that? I just did a search today for the fun of it. And I'm related to Jesse James, the American outlaw that was the bank and the train robber, and Benedict Arnold, who served in the American Revolution and ended up betraying America with Britain, and John Wilkes Booth, who shot Abraham Lincoln. Now, granted, these are far removed relatives, either like 12th cousin, or 8th cousin 4 times removed. So do I have a lot of their DNA strand? Not really. But it's kind of fun sometimes to see who you're related to, right? But sometimes we do have those in our tree not too far away that have maybe behaviors or different things that could even be concerning. But I think learning gives us perspective. What was happening at the time, what the circumstances are. But here's the beauty. Epigenetics is proving and showing that the blueprint, while a pattern, does not have to be who we are. By doing and being good versions of ourselves or doing the great, we can change the expression of our genes. So just because the DNA has it and you inherited the blueprint for your body from all of those ancestors, it doesn't have to be your story. And it doesn't have to be your life. So are you curious about what things switch on and off the genes? When I started learning about this, I was like, whoa, this is huge, because it empowers us. It steps us back into, you know what? I can create a different life. And all I need to do is do certain things that are good and nurturing for me and my family, etc. Because it is about the gene expression, and it's also about nurturing. It's also about the environment, right? But learning about our ancestors and their health concerns, etc., are helpful for us to know which genes we may have and where we want to put the effort to make sure that those are silenced and not expressed. So here are some of the things. Get your paper out or your notes app so that you can take some notes, because this is a game changer for us, right? This is our ability to step into creating something different from what we were given. Number one is nutrition. What are we eating? The gut biome has a lot to do with the mental health. It feeds the brain. If the gut ain't happy, the brain ain't happy. And so learning to really give wholesome, healthy nutrition, even supplementation, so that our body gets what it needs. So as we look at these, just make a mental check. How's my nutrition? Do I need to do something different in my eating? What can I add this week? Or what could I take away? Fasting has a lot to do with gene expression. And even the intermittent fasting, we know that when we give our body a break from a constant intake, that it does a lot of reparation, a lot of repairs, etc. Repairs and healing. Cold and heat have to do with it. The extremes of either aren't necessarily good, and they can open up the expression of a gene. Stress is huge. The cortisol running through our body. We know the cortisol creates the inflammation, and all disease is a form of inflammation. Learning how to control our thoughts and our moods and our emotions really is probably one of the most important things that we could learn in this lifetime, because when we create an emotion, it's not just something we feel in our heart and our mind. It's an actual chemical mixture that floods our body, cortisol being one of them, when we go into fight and flight. So if we are able to control our thoughts and bring ourselves to a different state, we're able to control the chemicals flooding our body. You know, someone may say, well, family, I came from a very angry family, and that's just the way we deal with things. Well, we can learn and we can get the tools to be able to change things, which is not only going to change our neurology and our emotions and our mental health, but also the physiology of our body. And that's what we're talking about, is what is ultimately going to change the physiology and biology of our bodies and mind. The next one is sleep. If you haven't had a chance to go back on the episode that talks about sleep, the incredible things that happen during sleep, but there is a reason why you should sleep a certain amount of time, because we sleep in cycles. And that fourth cycle, that's the one where we get the greatest benefit. And that doesn't happen on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. So go back and listen to that one. Exercise is huge. Not only does exercise help us with our stress, but it strengthens the immune system. It strengthens our body and our bones and the circulation to all of our organs. There isn't anyone that can't exercise, even if it's something that you do from a chair or in a little bit of water to take some pressure off your body. Exercise does the body good. Exercise is a huge game changer in gene expression. But this last one is the toxicity of our environment. Now, that can be taken many different ways. Are you in a place that creates a lot of stress? Are you with people that are toxic, that bring you down? But it's even the toxicity of the chemicals in our hygiene and our cleaning products that bring things down. And what drugs we are taking. Are we using certain drugs, or are some of our prescriptions altering gene expression? But even our cell phones can alter the brain. And when the brain is altered, it starts altering the biology of our body. But we do know that with neuroplasticity is that we can grow more connections and learn things. With that, we learn more coping skills, more ability to stay present. Meditation helps with that, helps with coping with life and helping us find answers. There are so many ways that we can become empowered and not just stay status quo and, oh, well, that's what my family's like. Oh, well, it runs in the family. It only continues to run if we are not the chain breaker. And I guess that's my point here with epigenetics. It's telling us, oh, yeah, you have an opportunity to be a chain breaker. Oh, yeah, there are controllables that you have that can break that chain. Oh, yeah, there are things that you can do to make sure that you don't express those genes that you know your family has. And then by ignoring it, you knowingly allow the possibility that that thing can have a propensity to switch on. And now here is a really cool thing. There's a new study out that talks about gratitude, and that people who are in constant gratitude, who live with that lens of gratitude, if you want to learn more about gratitude, go back on the episode on gratitude. They're finding that it changes the shape of the amygdala. Okay, this is huge. The amygdala, remember, that's where the fear comes from. And obviously, we don't want it to go away because it keeps us safe. But when people have enlarged PTSD amygdalas, they live in a world of fight and flight. Studies out that show that people who have certain diseases early on in life, they can go back in their life and see that they had childhood abuse or traumas of some sorts. And that's alive in their body, creating those situations where gene expression explodes. But with gratitude, they're finding it actually diminishes the size of the amygdala. Isn't that exciting? Oh, wow. Now, if you haven't had a chance to listen back to Hope, Can It Be Taught? Go back and watch that episode too, because there's a lot of information pertaining to this. The studies out there are incredible. Are we the DNA of our ancestors? Absolutely, yes, we are. We're a mixture of all of them. Could we carry a predisposition for some health markers and some emotional markers? Yes, we can. It's also environmental things that are passed down. But through continuing studies of the power of understanding epigenetics, we recognize that we can step into a level of control and power in our life if we get serious about controlling the markers. Again, I'm going to go through them really fast. The nutrition, the gut biome, fasting, cold heat, stress, sleep, exercise, mood, and age. I'm not sure what we can do, but that toxicity in our environment, whether it be emotional toxicity or actually be chemicals. So this week, what are some of those things that you think, wow, you know what? I do know that my family has this predisposition, but maybe if I started doing a little bit of meditation and breath work, go back on the breath work episode, that's a game changer. That's a game changer for epigenetics. Or, yes, I know my family has heart disease. Man, I'm really going to focus on that nutrition because it doesn't have to be my story. Even though I've been given that pattern, I don't need to do the things to facilitate them opening up. I think I'll do the things to calm them down and change them. And look at our environment. What are those environmental things that we don't want to pass on to the next generation? We are the game changers. We are the ones that can say, you know what? This abuse, this neglect, this whatever it is, I'm going to stop the chain. It's going to stop here so that I can pass on to my children and they can pass on to theirs a totally different story. Even though we're sharing a DNA strand, it doesn't have to be the end of the story. We can actually make a better pattern, one of our choosing. Now, if you don't know a lot about your ancestors, don't worry, because next week, we're going to tiptoe you into how to find information about them, where to begin, and what kinds of questions should you be asking. And even of those that are still alive, take advantage of time now to ask them lots of different questions. So I'm going to give you a pile of questions that you can ask. And while we're at it, have you started to record your journey? Are you keeping records for your posterity? What can they learn from you? And if you don't like your story so far, let's rewrite it. Let's make some change ups. Remember, we can learn everything from experience, but the wise learn from those that have already gone there and have already had the experience. And we can already learn from their successes and their failures. So our ability to shortcut and make the next right steps comes from gleaning from those who have lived longer. We can draw strength and wisdom from our predecessors and their journeys. There's so much that we can learn from what they experienced and how they dealt with it. And it's time to embrace our heritage, tap tap into that ancestral power and draw strength from the immense resilience in the face of adversity. It's time to celebrate your lineage, honor your past, and build an even stronger future. So our choices can make real differences in how we develop as human beings, and we get to create it. So this week, think about those markers. Think about those things you want to add, those things you want to leave behind. And let's go out and create. See you next week.